Idi Amin was a brutal dictator, one of the worst of the last 100 years.
Murder, genocide, cannibalism, just a few of the things that Idi Amin became famous for. Viewer discretion is advised as we take a look into Idi Amin, quite possibly the most brutal dictator in history. Serving as the President of Uganda from 1971 to 1979, during his rule, he carried out unspeakable crimes against his own people.
Choked with their own penises stuffed down their throats, and some even dynamited in groups.
There are stories of pregnant women, children, and even infants being beheaded under Amin's regime, often for no reason other than their ethnicity or perceived allegiance to a rival tribe or group.
Born in Koboko, Uganda in 1925, Amin joined the British colonial army as a young man in 1946.
Part of the King's African Rifles, he served as an assistant cook who proved himself to be an ambitious soldier.
He soon rose up the ranks, developing a reputation as a violent and brutal recruit.
People who were supposed to be arrested would suddenly end up dead. The British nonetheless kept promoting him.
It was the methods he used to cut off the genitals of the culprits and humiliate them.
Amin soon went from a kitchen boy to being in charge of suppressing rebel groups across Uganda, where his brutality was put to better use.
The methods employed by Amin's police are extremely brutal. Victims are clubbed to death, burned in the savannah, their bodies thrown to the crocodiles in the Nile, or shot publicly, wearing white aprons to highlight the blood.
In 1962, Uganda gained its independence from the British Empire, but less than 10 years later, the ambitious young cook had been promoted to commander. By 1970, Amin had control of all the armed forces in Uganda, using them to seize control a year later.
After relations with Prime Minister Obote soured, Amin staged a relatively bloodless coup on January 25, 1971, and took power over Uganda.
After taking control, Amin became famous for his eccentric nature across the globe.
Right from the start, cameras from around the world are focused on this eccentric and unpredictable individual who thinks nothing of being interviewed in his swimming pool wearing pajamas.
I do both politics and sports.
He finds provocative ways to humiliate his previous masters. He obliges British businessmen to kneel and declare allegiance to him. He has his throne carried by 4 white men.
Amin redirected money from healthcare, education, and infrastructure into the military, as well as spending it on himself. Parliament was dissolved as he took control of all aspects of the nation's governance. He also bestowed a new title onto himself.
President for life, Dr. Al-Haji Idi Amin, king of all the beasts on the earth and the fishes in the sea, and liberator from the British Empire of all of Africa and Uganda in particular. And that's not just a sentence, that was his title.
As his power grew, so did his paranoia, and soon after taking control, he began to purge the nation of any potential threats and silence political opponents.
Amin ordered massive massacres motivated by ethnic, political, and financial factors, and created a death toll estimated by Amnesty International at 500,000.
To silence individuals who spoke out against his tyranny, the butcher of Uganda would often sever their tongues as a terrible punishment.
Amin's paranoia seemed to get worse over time as he became convinced that many of his close advisors and even relatives were out to get him.
Everyone is subjected to the repression, starting with his closest collaborators, who start to disappear one after the other.
He was scared that something can happen to his life because how he was ruling. People were scared of him, and also he was scared of the people.
Everybody in Uganda, members of the armed forces, police, and the public, they are responsible for my security. And immediately they hear anybody making subversive activities or try to plan anything against me, they report that person straight to the police.
Unlike other dictators, Amin was known to get personally involved with the violence carried out against his people.
His home is situated only a few meters from the principal center of detention and torture. To enter without being seen, Amin has had a tunnel built. He tortures the victims himself and then usually finishes them off with a sledgehammer.
For Reports suggest that Idi Amin believed that tasting the blood of his enemies would appease their spirits in some way.
He would personally torture people and then feed their heads to crocodiles. He also proudly spoke about eating the flesh of his enemies.
His eccentricity extended further than just interviews in pajamas, with one story of a dinner party held by Amin making international news.
Halfway through the meal, he left the table only to return with the frozen head of Brigadier Suleiman Hussein in his hands. His aghast guests didn't know where to look as he proceeded to direct a barrage of abuse at the head and then throw cutlery at it.
On another occasion, some of Amin's wives partied with their bodyguards in an effort to provoke their husband. He immediately demanded they leave his home on national radio before promising to divorce them. Two of his wives managed to flee, but a third named Kay was found a year later cut to pieces in the trunk of a car.
Amin takes advantage of the event for a macabre display. He has Kay's stitched-up body exposed in front of the hospital for all the crowd to see, and even forces her own children to look at it.
The brutal and bizarre regime of Idi Amin came to an end in 1979 after his failed attempt to invade Tanzania ended in collapse of his government. He fled to Libya before living out the rest of his days in Saudi Arabia.
After accepting asylum and living freely in Saudi Arabia, Idi Amin died of kidney failure on August 16, 2003.
So, is Idi Amin the worst dictator the world has ever seen? Let us know in the comments below. If you have other suggestions for videos you'd love to see, be sure to let us know. See you next time.